This is Amy Laura Hall, and I am making a short video today about how to do a close reading of a film, meaning a moving picture. So a film, a movie, a television episode. And I want to start out by recommending that if you're interested in my recommendations for close reading, I would suggest that you start with the video I made for close reading an image, and then move to the close reading of text, and then watch this video about doing a close reading of a movie, television episode, or other moving image. So I think I've given different directions on which video to watch first, but the more I think about it as I'm trying to teach remotely, the more I think I should have this video be the third in the grouping. And here is why. I am learning that it is difficult, it's especially difficult for some people to do a close reading of a movie or television episode that they love or that they grew up loving. And I'll go ahead and start by saying that this semester, one of the documentaries I have assigned is a documentary reading Walt Disney productions closely. So the documentary is a close reading of different Walt Disney productions, and I already know that some of my students in my classes and some people who are just following along by watching my YouTube videos, that for some of you, it's very difficult to be critical of Walt Disney, not just because of the geopolitics of how much Walt Disney, the whole thing, how much Walt Disney is a geopolitical thing, but also because many people grew up with Walt Disney as their backdrop of their hopes, dreams, and delights. So being critical of anything Walt Disney, I've learned, is difficult for some people. So I want to start out by saying that being critical of a genre of film, being critical of an entire production company like Disney, does not necessarily mean that I'm suggesting you boycott the entire set of moving pictures that are connected to a particular genre or a particular filmmaker. That's not what I'm calling for. I'm not here politically calling for a boycott of all things Disney. I am suggesting that reading some items within the Disney repertoire will be helpful for people who are thinking about their most gut responses to certain questions about their own body, about race, about all sorts of different things. So I will give you a very concrete example of doing a close reading of a moving picture that happened in real time in a class I was teaching with people in a room together. So this was before the pandemic, and this has happened several times actually in classes. We have, as a class, watched a Disney short. It's about 10 minutes long, called The Story of Menstruation. And I believe this is correct, that The Story of Menstruation was a production around 1946, late 1940s. But it was shown in public schools, in churches, etc., as an instructional video that was created by Walt Disney Studios, commissioned by the Cello Cotton Company, C-E-L-L-O Cotton Company, which is now Kimberly-Clark. And so if you want to look it up, you can look up The Story of Menstruation, and you can watch the whole thing in full. And in class, when I have shown this Disney short, The Story of Menstruation, it has been fascinating and helpful to listen to the groans and the different kinds of exclamations that some of the students in the class who identify as female, who have experienced menstruation, some of the students in the class who've experienced menstruation firsthand, listening to their just disgust, frustration, dismay at this video, and then having a conversation, because some of the students in the class are watching it and thinking, well, what's inaccurate about this instructional video that is telling the story of menstruation? And so doing a close reading of a few scenes in that short 10-minute, it's basically an advertisement for Kimberly-Clark products. So watching that video and looking at particular scenes and having students in the class who groaned in dismay or frustration think about what they're seeing and why what they're seeing is bothering them. So that whole conversation, which sometimes can take a whole hour and a half or so, having that conversation together in a classroom is extremely helpful. And I will just tell you a few short things about those conversations. One is the language around obedience. So if you watch this 10-minute, The Story of Menstruation from the late 1940s, which was, I think, being shown still in the early 1960s, the last time I checked, I think that's correct. So if you watch it, one of the things perhaps to consider is the language of obedience. Also the sounds. So the voice, the particular instructional voice, and her intonation. So listening for cues in the narrator's voice is one way to do a close reading, to think about what the overall storytelling method is in the story of menstruation. So there's one example. There are lots more Disney shorts to watch, but The Story of Menstruation, it may be one place to start if you're curious about doing a close reading. And again, I'm not calling for a boycott of all Kimberly-Clark products or all Disney anything. I'm just suggesting that there is a story being told, and it will be helpful perhaps to start with something from the 1940s, the late 1940s, if you're already frustrated that I'm suggesting people should be critically aware of Walt Disney productions. All right, lots more on Disney. I could do a 2-hour video on Disney, but I will not. I will move on. So another example of doing a close reading of a film, a moving picture, is that I've really enjoyed teaching is Star Trek. And one of the reasons, there's a whole video that I made about why I teach using Star Trek. But one of the reasons I teach using Star Trek is because whereas the Story of Menstruation is from a bygone era, Star Trek, which is also, I guess, kind of now from a bygone era, is in a different created world that is connected to the world I walk around in and most of my students walk around in. But it's, I guess the genre's, it's not really science fiction. What is it? Whatever, it's Star Trek. It's Gene Roddenberry's created world. And sometimes for students who are trying to think through questions that they think they already know the answers to, like questions about traveling for global health. That's where I've used Star Trek most recently, is in a course that I've taught repeatedly on global health. Sometimes watching a built world by somebody like Gene Roddenberry can be helpful to create enough distance that people can think critically about what they think they already know. For example, about communication across different cultures, across different groups of people, across different languages. So I ask students to think critically about the universal translator and what it would mean to take it seriously that we don't have a universal translator like they do in Gene Roddenberry's built world of Star Trek. But here is another way to think about doing a close reading is through music. And so an exercise I've recommended in the past is to listen to the opening theme to 3 different Star Trek series. So starting with The Next Generation, listen to the music and pay attention to what's happening with the vehicles going through or not going through space, the final frontier, during what kinds of tonal sounds in the opening song. I am not a music person. I love music, but I know almost nothing about what words to use when it comes to describing a particular song. There is a whole dissertation written, and I'm sorry, I don't remember the name of the person who wrote a whole Duke University, a PhD dissertation on music in Star Trek. But if you look up music, Star Trek, Duke dissertation, hopefully their product, their project, their dissertation, and hopefully it's now a book, will come up. So you can write a whole dissertation on music in Star Trek and be brilliant. I just ask students to think about a little bit about the music going on. And what's really wonderful in a classroom setting is that students who do know about music and know how to describe what's happening in the music and what kinds of tones and pacing, what instruments the production includes. So students who've played in orchestra, who've played in band, who know music well can say this particular instrument, I think they're using this particular instrument to convey a particular sense in this opening song. So starting with Next Generation, then moving to Deep Space Nine, and then moving to Voyager, thinking about the opening song, the opening visuals, and also then thinking about the scenario that the particular series, The Next Generation, Deep Space Nine, and Voyager involve, the different scenarios going on in those 3 distinct, related but distinct Star Trek series, and who plays the captain in each of those different series. So that's one way to do an extended close reading of music, is thinking about some particular aspect. Now, if you're writing a 2-page close reading, you are not going to be able to do all 3 of those opening songs. You're going to pick one detail from one of those opening songs, one visual detail, one oral, one detail that you're paying attention to regarding what you're hearing. And you are always, in my classes at least, you are always welcome to contact somebody you know who knows something about film, who knows something about videography, who knows something about music, to ask what they're hearing. Just make sure you cite them in your footnotes. I had a conversation with my roommate. I had a conversation with my brother. I had a conversation with my uncle, my aunt, my grandmother about this particular detail in the document that I'm looking at. Okay, so there also, I'll give you a what not to do in relation to colors in a close reading of a moving picture, also of an image. So this is something that I'm not exactly sure where this comes from, but it is a common mistake in close readings. I've found that some students at some point have been taught in a class that a particular color evokes a particular emotion across supposedly all times and places among people. I mean, I'm not even sure you can say that a particular color evokes a particular response among all mammals of a certain kind somewhere. But for people, don't do that. So do not do in this episode of, let's pick something, in this episode of the show Atlanta, which I highly recommend. In this episode, blue represents purity because blue is a color that represents purity. It's like, no. To whom? For whom? Where? Everybody, everywhere. That color, blue, connotes purity. And also, I will say this happens sometimes where some students have been trained to see a particular color a particular way, and then they'll import that into the movie they're watching, or they'll see, this was an example, is somebody saw a crown in one of the scenes from Moonlight and thought that in that scene, the crown in that one scene of Moonlight represented the crown that Jesus Christ wears as Lord and Savior. And that wasn't at all what was going on in the film, but it was an importation of a symbol from a different setting. And yeah, don't do that. So, all right, hopefully that's clear. I will be willing to answer lots of other questions, but if you find yourself writing or thinking something like, well, of course this means this because this is the universal symbol for X, Y, or Z, or this color is a color that physiologically represents or evokes a particular emotion among human beings. Just don't do that. Stop doing this thing represents this whatever, or this color evokes this everywhere. That's just not, that's not true, period, in the world about any color, and don't do that. Okay, all right. I've already got this written all out in my guides for close reading, but just in case you're wanting to learn through video, just don't do that. Okay, so here is another way to do a close reading that might be helpful. This set of comments I have, please do not listen to my words that are about to come out of my mouth if you have not yet seen the movie Get Out. So if you have not seen the movie Get Out, stop this video, do not listen to my words, because someday you may want to watch the movie Get Out and I'm about to ruin it, all right? Okay, so there are multiple different reasons why I have in the past assigned the movie Get Out. For one, it's a really great movie. For another, doing close reading of costume choices, of musical choices that Jordan Peele created in this movie. It's a movie very open to close reading. It is also, though, a movie where obviously where people who are watching the film are going to be bringing their own perspectives, their own presuppositions. Some students I've taught in the past came to watching the movie without knowing anything about it. And those conversations have been really interesting as students who already knew what it was going to be about, having reactions that were very different than students who didn't know what they were going to be watching. So it's for multiple reasons, a movie that I love to assign for a close reading. It's also thematically a very important movie, I think, for people to have a conversation about in the United States. Here is one. I'm going to give some details, and then I'm going to recommend a scene for a close reading. So one of the details I have repeatedly suggested students pay attention to if they're making a broad generalization about the themes of the movie Get Out. One thing I've begged people to pay attention to is the casting of the parents in the film. So I've asked students to do something really simple, and that is to think about the character that Bradley Whitford plays in the film. So if you don't know anything about Bradley Whitford, look him up on whatever search engine that you have available and think about what connotations, what associations, that's the right word, what association, which visual associations white people, okay, that was a big generalization, but what visual associations would people bring if when they see his face? And I'll put it this way, to put it really simply, he plays a really key character in West Wing. And if you don't know anything about how West Wing functions among a certain demographic of people in the United States who are viewing things supposedly about politics, you can look up West Wing and find out more. But it was a brilliant casting decision on Jordan Peele's part to cast Bradley Whitford. And in contrast, think about how different the movie would have been if he'd cast John Goodman. And if you don't know who John Goodman is, look him up and think about what visual associations some people coming into the movie would have had if they'd had John Goodman playing the terrifying father. Again, spoiler alert, I've ruined the movie for you. The terrifying father in Get Out. If John Goodman had played the father, it would have been a very different movie, and I don't think it would have been this. It would have been, yeah, he couldn't have done the same movie with John Goodman as Dad. He would have connoted, associated. People would have associated John Goodman with a different kind of character. He has a different physique. They're both white, but he's got a different physique. He's got different associations going on. And so another thing I've asked students to think about is why a teacup? Why a teacup in Get Out instead of a coffee mug? And why this particular kind and shape of teacup and spoon in a key set of scenes in Get Out? It makes a difference. Jordan Peele is making very particular decisions in what he's conveying in the movie Get Out. And if you haven't heard interviews with him about his choices and what choices he felt like he really needed to make in order to impress on certain viewers certain things, look up also his words about the scene, a key scene where somebody is stabbed. So I'll just leave it that way, just in case you've not seen the movie and you're still listening to my words, even though I asked you not to. So you can listen to some of Jordan Peele's words about what he thought he needed to do in a key scene in order to keep people viewing the movie sympathetically. All right, and on that note, then you can go back to the 1967 film, Guess Who's Coming to Dinner, and think about what difference it made for people going to view that movie in 1967, 1968, when they're going to the movie theater, seeing this movie, what difference it made that Spencer Tracy and Katharine Hepburn play the parents. And think about alternatives that would have given the audience very, very different associations than these two people as a couple. And you can also think about the architecture of their living room in that movie, if it helps you to get some distance, then to come back and watch Get Out and think about what difference it makes, the clothing that the parents are wearing in Get Out and what it connects. I mean, at one point with one person I was visiting with who just was frustrated with me when I was trying to explain that the movie has something to do with economic class, I said it makes a difference that that Bradley Whitford does not walk out the front door with a John Deere cap on. If he walked out the front door of his house with a John Deere cap on, it would have been a different association than what he walks out wearing. And so, yeah, very small choices make for a big difference in a moving picture. And you can listen always to a director's commentary if you need help thinking through the very careful choices that a filmmaker is making, that a team of filmmakers are making, the decisions that they're making when they're creating something like Star Trek Next Generation, or moving back to 1946, The Story of Menstruation. Okay, now the last thing I was going to say is that in an interview with Jordan Peele, I heard him talk about how Betty Gabriel, the actress Betty Gabriel, made this particular scene that she is in very much her own, and did it brilliantly. And it's a scene where in the script, I think you'll have to, I'm sorry, I don't have this all written out as a transcript of what Jordan Peele said, but in the interview, I can't remember where, it was in a podcast. In the interview, Jordan Peele is explaining that on the script, what Betty Gabriel had in the scene was no. The word that she was to say was no, and I think it might have been a series of no, but you have to watch the scene carefully to recognize what this brilliant actor has done with her eyes in that scene. Watching what she does with her very minimal, small facial expressions in that one scene tells you so much, can tell you so much about why Get Out is a love story. Again, if you have not seen this movie, I'm ruining it for you, but in that scene, Betty Gabriel, through very slight, very small cues in her facial expression, is conveying get out, but she can't. They're two different people inside this one face, and one of those people is controlling as best she can the voice of another human being who is trying to convey get out. And I can't reproduce this. This brilliant actor has produced this very short scene that is key to the whole movie. And it's one of the reasons why I assign the movie when I teach a class on love, because there is a love story in Get Out, and it involves people's courage is too slight a word to try to convey to their brother that he needs to get out. So yeah, there are other visuals in that film that you can look at, but that's one that I would spend time on if I were going to teach, if I were teaching that movie, that film currently in one of my classes, is look at what Betty Gabriel has conveyed in that one short scene that's just the crux, one of the many, you can't have many cruxes, one of the many key turning points in the film, and to me, one of the reasons why the film is indeed a love story. All right, that's what I've got for today, and if I have the energy and capacity and my dogs aren't barking, I'll do another short video about doing a close reading of images. But those are the basics I have for you, and if you want to ask me questions, I'll do my best to answer them. But I think if you consider these different items and these different warnings and caveats, hopefully you'll be able to take something away from this that will be useful. Thank you for listening. And I can never find the cursor when it's time to There we go. All right, there's the cursor, ending video.